I woke up to the sound of my neighbors screaming. Not the usual morning birdsong or the gentle hum of my solar panels soaking in the early sunlight. No, this was a high-pitched, rage-fueled screech. My heart pounded as I threw on my robe, rushed outside, and stopped dead in my tracks. My solar panels were gone. The entire array, ripped straight off my roof, leaving nothing but exposed wires and a sickening sense of violation in my gut. And there, standing smugly in my yard, was the devil herself, Karen from the HOA, arms crossed, an infuriating smirk plastered across her face like she had just won the lottery. "You weren't in compliance, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "So I fixed the problem." Fixed? My blood pressure spiked so fast I could practically hear my veins popping. I stared in disbelief at the empty space where my hard-earned, state-of-the-art solar panels had been just yesterday. Panels I had installed perfectly within the HOA guidelines. Panels that had cost me thousands of dollars. And now they were gone, just like that, thanks to a woman who had the moral compass of a raccoon in a garbage bin. I clenched my fists, inhaling through my nose like a bull about to charge. I had to stop myself from saying something that would get me arrested. "You stole my property." Karen sighed dramatically, as if this entire thing was exhausting for her. "Confiscated," she corrected. "You were warned multiple times about the violation. Your solar panels were an eyesore. And frankly, the board agreed that they just didn't fit the aesthetic of our community." I took a step closer, but she didn't flinch. "Where are they?" "Oh, they've been repurposed," she said, waving her hand vaguely toward the HOA clubhouse. "Much better use of them, don't you think?" My eye twitched. Repurposed? My solar panels, the ones I had paid for, installed, and legally owned, had been ripped off my property and were now supposedly benefiting the HOA? My fists itched to strangle something, preferably an HOA rulebook. Or Karen. I forced myself to take a deep breath. "This is theft," I said, my voice low and controlled. "I have security footage. You had no legal right to do this." Karen's smirk faltered, but only for a second. "Oh, Mark," she cooed, tilting her head like I was a naive child. "I am the HOA. And the HOA makes the rules." My fingers curled around the phone in my pocket. I had half a mind to call the cops right then and there, but something told me Karen had already covered her bases with some ridiculous fine print buried in an HOA amendment no one had read. That was her game. Always had been. Finding loopholes, making people miserable, flexing her tiny amount of power like she was some kind of suburban dictator. I looked around. A few neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves. I could see the flicker of concern in their eyes, but also something else, fear. No one dared to challenge Karen directly. She had made an example out of too many people. If I let this slide, I'd be next. Karen turned on her heel, flipping her over-bleached bob dramatically as she strutted toward her golf cart, the same one I had seen in my security footage hauling away my property. "Oh, and Mark," she called over her shoulder, "make sure you take down that ridiculous electric fence, too. It's against code." I watched as she drove off, my pulse roaring in my ears. That was it. That was the moment I knew. Karen had just started a war, and she had no idea that I was about to finish it. The next few hours were spent in a blind, seething rage. I paced my living room, replaying the footage of Karen and her HOA cronies dismantling my panels like a gang of smug raccoons. Every time I watched her smug face on the screen, my blood boiled hotter. I could go the legal route. I could file a complaint. But I knew how that would end. Karen had the HOA wrapped around her perfectly manicured little finger. The board would side with her, and I'd be left paying some ludicrous fine while she basked in her victory. No. If I was going to take Karen down, I had to be smart. I had to be ruthless, and I had to be a little bit evil. That's when the idea hit me. It started as a spark, then grew into something more, a fully formed, diabolically brilliant plan that made me grin for the first time all day. Karen wanted to play dirty? Fine. Let's see how she handled a little shock therapy. I grabbed my tools and got to work. First, I installed a brand new set of solar panels. Not on my roof this time, but on my electric fence. The very fence Karen had been trying to get me to remove for months. If she thought she could steal from me without consequences, she was about to get the jolt of a lifetime. I meticulously wired the new panels into the fence, ensuring that anyone who touched it, especially someone with grabby hands and an oversized sense of entitlement, would get a harmless but humiliating shock. Just enough to send a clear message. By the time the sun set, my masterpiece was complete. The fence stood tall, gleaming in the golden light, a silent guardian protecting my property from any future theft. And the best part? I knew Karen wouldn't be able to resist trying to take the panels again. I sat back on my porch, sipping a well-earned beer, and waited. Because I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen came back. And this time, she was going to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong homeowner. The night before the trap was set, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous. Oh no, I was excited. The kind of excitement that bubbles in your chest when you know you're about to witness karma in action. I had spent the entire day meticulously wiring the new solar panels into my electric fence, making sure every connection was perfect. The setup was simple but genius. The moment someone touched that fence, they would get a harmless but unforgettable zap. Enough to make them think twice before laying their grubby hands on my property ever again. And knowing Karen, it was only a matter of time before she took the bait. I spent the next morning pretending to mind my own business, mowed the lawn, watered the plants, even gave a friendly wave to some neighbors who were watching me with barely concealed curiosity. The HOA rumor mill had clearly been working overtime. Everyone knew about the solar panel theft, but no one dared to take my side publicly. Fear of Karen's wrath kept them in check. And then, just as expected, the inevitable happened. Karen pulled up in her golf cart around noon, wearing her signature oversized sunglasses and that self-important strut that made my teeth itch. Behind her, two of her loyal HOA minions, Todd and Linda, followed closely, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Karen's voice carried across the yard, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mark, I warned you," she announced dramatically, stepping out of the cart. "And yet here we are again. More solar panels. More violations. You never learn, do you?" I turned off my hose and wiped my hands on my jeans, giving her my best confused look. "Violations? I don't recall breaking any rules." She let out an exaggerated sigh, like she was dealing with a particularly slow child. "The HOA has strict policies about the aesthetic harmony of our neighborhood. And your little science project here? It's an eyesore. I gave you a chance to comply voluntarily, but since you refuse, I have no choice but to remove them again." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? You mean steal them again?" Todd and Linda exchanged nervous glances, but Karen didn't flinch. She was too deep in her own delusions of power. "Confiscate," she corrected smugly. "And since you clearly don't learn your lesson, I'll be adding a fine this time. A substantial one." I crossed my arms. "Let me get this straight. You're planning to break onto my property again and take something that belongs to me?" Karen gave a tight smile. "Mark, you really need to stop thinking of it that way. This is about community standard. And as president of the HOA, it's my responsibility to enforce them. Now, are you going to take them down yourself, or will we have to do it for you?" I fought the urge to grin. She had no idea she was walking straight into a trap. I shrugged, stepping aside with a gesture toward the fence. "Go ahead." Karen's smile widened. She turned to Todd and Linda. "Well, get to work." Todd hesitated. Karen, are we sure about this? Last time, people were kind of upset about." Karen snapped her fingers impatiently. "Oh, stop being dramatic, Todd. It's just solar panels. Do you want your HOA privileges revoked?" Todd swallowed hard and stepped forward, reluctantly reaching for the first panel. And then it happened. The moment his fingers brushed the frame, a crackling jolt surged through him. His entire body seized up, and with a shout of surprise, he stumbled backward, his hair standing on end like a cartoon character who had just been electrocuted. Linda, in a reflexive act of concern, reached out to steady him, and got zapped herself. She let out a yelp, flailing wildly before falling flat on her backside. Karen, standing between them, looked at both of them in complete bewilderment. What the? Before she could finish her thought, she reached for the fence herself. The zap that followed was magnificent. Karen screamed. Not a little yelp, not a startled gasp. A full-blown, horror movie-worthy scream that sent birds flying from nearby trees. Her entire body convulsed, and in her panic, she stumbled backward, tripped over a flower pot, and landed face-first in my azalea bush. For a few glorious seconds, everything was silent. And then, somewhere in the distance, a snicker. A neighbor. Then another. And another. The crowd that had been cautiously watching from their porches and driveways erupted into laughter. Someone actually whistled in approval. Karen, red-faced and disheveled, scrambled to her feet, yanking leaves and petals from her hair. What just happened?" she shrieked. I leaned casually against the fence, suppressing the biggest grin of my life. "Oh, didn't I mention? I wired my solar panels to my electric fence. Gotta protect my property, you know." Karen's jaw dropped. You can't do that," she sputtered. I shrugged. "Sure I can. My fence was already there. It's completely legal. And the panels? Well, they're mine and I'm protecting them." Todd, still recovering from his shock, muttered, "I think my soul left my body." Linda sat on the ground, rubbing her arm. I can still feel my teeth vibrating. Karen, however, wasn't laughing. Her face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "You think you've won?" I nodded. "Oh, I know I have." Her lips curled into a tight, trembling line. She turned sharply toward the small crowd of neighbors, who were now wide-eyed with delight. Some were still filming the aftermath. This is a violation," she screamed. "Mark has endangered the community. This is a criminal offense. I'm calling the police." I tilted my head, looking at the security camera mounted on my porch. "Oh, please do. Let's show them the footage of you and your goons breaking onto my property, attempting to steal from me, again, and getting exactly what you deserved." Karen's face paled. The crowd murmured. A few people actually cheered. And that was when Karen realized something. For the first time ever, she had lost. She stomped her foot like an angry toddler, spun on her heel, and stormed back to her golf cart. Todd and Linda, looking thoroughly traumatized, scrambled after her. The golf cart screeched away, leaving nothing behind but tire marks on the pavement and the sweet satisfaction of victory in my chest. I turned back toward my house, taking a deep breath of the best air I'd ever breathed in my life. Karen had been humiliated. The HOA had been put in its place. And this was just the beginning. The fallout from Karen's electrifying humiliation was immediate. The entire neighborhood was buzzing, quite literally, about what had happened. Word spread faster than wildfire, and by the time the HOA board had their emergency meeting that evening, half the community had already seen the footage of Karen flailing in my azalea bush like a raccoon caught in a trash can. The video was everywhere. Social media, neighborhood group chats, even a few TikToks that had already gained thousands of views. But Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. If anything, the embarrassment only fueled her vendetta. The very next morning, I woke up to find a formal HOA violation notice duct-taped to my front door, flapping dramatically in the wind like some kind of declaration of war. Illegal electric fencing, dangerous and non-compliant. Immediate removal required. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Illegal electric fencing? The same one that had been standing for years without a problem? The same one Karen had never cared about until it got in the way of her thievery? Oh, this was rich. I wasn't just going to ignore it, I was going to weaponize it. I grabbed my phone and sent a message to the entire HOA email list. Dear neighbors, in response to Karen's recent concerns about community safety, I'll be hosting a live demonstration of my fence's dangerous electric capabilities. Since she seems to believe it's an actual hazard, I invite anyone who feels at risk to come and see for themselves. I'll even provide refreshments. See you all at 5 p.m. By late afternoon, a good 30 people had gathered outside my yard, all waiting for the show. Some had brought lawn chairs. A few had brought snacks. It was a full-on neighborhood event. Karen, of course, arrived in a huff, arms crossed, flanked by 2 other board members, one of whom looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I stood in front of the fence, hands in my pockets, grinning. All right, folks, let's get this settled once and for all. My so-called dangerous electric fence runs on a solar-powered, low-voltage system. It's harmless. But just in case anyone's skeptical, let's do a little test. I turned to Karen and gestured toward the fence. Since you seem so worried about it, why don't you be the first volunteer? Her nostrils flared so hard I thought she might spontaneously combust. I am not touching that death trap. Then let me demonstrate, I said, and before she could object, I reached out and placed my entire hand on the fence. Nothing. No shock, no jolt, nothing but a mild tingle. Exactly as I had designed it. The crowd murmured. Some even laughed. One of the neighbors, Mike, stepped forward. Wait, so you're telling me this is what Karen called the cops over? Karen's face went beet red. That's not the point. It's the principle. It's an eyesore and a safety hazard. Mike squinted at the fence. It looks just like a normal fence to me. Another neighbor chimed in. Didn't Karen steal your solar panels? Karen froze. The energy of the crowd shifted. This wasn't just about my fence anymore. This was about Karen abusing her power for the last several years. I folded my arms. Great question. You know, Karen never really explained why she thought it was okay to steal thousands of dollars worth of solar panels from a homeowner. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen panicked. It was an HOA decision. Oh. I raised an eyebrow. So where exactly did the HOA install my panels? Because they sure as hell aren't on my roof anymore. The board member standing beside her, a balding man named Richard, cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, that's actually something we, need to discuss, Karen. Karen whipped her head toward him so fast I thought her neck might snap. What? Richard hesitated, then sighed, running a hand over his face. Look, after last night's incident, some of us started looking into, some of your past financial decisions. The crowd went silent. Karen's eyes darted around, her breathing shallow. What do you mean? Richard cleared his throat. The solar panels? They weren't repurposed for the community like you claimed. They were sold. And we traced the money. He sighed again, looking genuinely disgusted. Karen, you used HOA funds for personal expenses, a spa membership, a Peloton, a $500 steakhouse bill. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Oh, hell no." Karen's face went from red to pale in an instant. That's ridiculous. I was reimbursing myself for HOA-related business. Richard cut her off. You embezzled HOA funds. We have the receipt. We're calling an emergency vote to remove you as president immediately. A roar of approval erupted from the crowd. People cheered, some even clapped. Karen looked around in horror, realizing that her power, her entire reign of terror, was collapsing right in front of her. She opened her mouth to argue, but the crowd drowned her out. Someone shouted, "Get out, Karen!" Another yelled, "Take your rules and leave." Karen whirled toward me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. "This is your fault," she screamed. I gave her the biggest, most satisfied grin of my life. "No, Karen. This is karma." That was the final straw. With a wordless scream of frustration, she stormed off to her golf cart, revved the tiny engine like a NASCAR driver, and peeled out of the neighborhood. The HOA board officially voted her out within the hour. The financial scandal was bad enough, but the fact that she had shamed herself so publicly made it impossible for her to recover. By the next morning, she was gone. I woke up, stepped onto my porch, and took the deepest, most satisfying breath of my life. The sun was shining. The air was crisp. And most importantly, Karen was no longer the HOA president. As I walked to my yard, I was greeted by Mike, who handed me a cold beer. That, he said, grinning, was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. I clinked my beer against his. To Karen free living. The neighborhood erupted into cheers. And just like that, peace was restored. My solar panels were returned, the HOA was restructured, and best of all, my electric fence remained standing, because, as it turned out, everyone liked it better than Karen.